All right, chapter 4 is another investigation, and the authors up the ante a bit in describing a little bit more about how to teach reading as an historian and a little bit more about how to teach writing. And to start with, they have the same kind of foundational concepts. They're adding to their disciplinary literacy practices the notion of contextualizing historical sources. And what that ends up being in practice is simply when you're demonstrating this for students, it's talking aloud, thinking aloud, how you're thinking about the facts that you read as you're reading. So you're really talking to the text. The CCSS link, next gen links are there, and I'll let you look at those on your own, as well as the C3 links. All right, so the question for this investigation is, were Daniel Shays and his men rebels or freedom fighters? And they provide a bit of a context. You are an historical detective trying to decide if Daniel Shays and his men were rebels or freedom fighters when they mobbed courthouses and tried to capture weapons in 1786 to 1787. Many of these men fought for independence in the Revolutionary War. So why would they turn around and fight against the government of their new independent nation so soon after the Revolution? All right, so their investigation begins with the first document, which is a speech by someone by the name of Gray. So once again, you do the I read. So let's go ahead and start again with the things that we've learned from chapter 3. So Gray's speech, okay, I know this is a speech. I don't know much about Gray. I've got to keep reading a bit. So let's look at the head note. After the Revolutionary War, the country as well as many individuals were in debt. The Articles of Confederation included a basic plan for states to work together, but did not offer solutions to the debt problem. Some men in Massachusetts were upset with the state government. Many of these men were poor farmers. They began to take action against their government by stopping the court trials and jailing of people in debt. They believed they were fighting for their right as U.S. citizens. Here, Daniel Gray lists the complaints that caused these men to rise up. So this gives us a little bit of context, and there's further context that we could use as teachers, which I'm not going to get into in this video, but there's more context in this chapter behind the problem that people had about this question itself. Some people called this a rebellion, others feel that it was freedom fighting, and so the class's goal is to decide what do they think. Before going on with the reading of the text, let's do the sourcing. We know that Daniel Gray is the chairman of a committee for the above purpose, so we'll understand he's got a definite bias in laying out what he perceives as these 5 problems. The source is, this is an excerpt from a speech by Daniel Gray, who, as stated up here, is a member of a unit of armed soldiers to the people of several towns in Hampshire, Massachusetts. And this speech occurred on December 7 of 1786. So let's go ahead with that bit of context and do the main idea work that we need to do. So it begins, and remember this is a speech. Gentlemen, we have thought it best to tell you of some of the main causes of the recent risings of the people and also of their actions. First, there is little money right now. The harsh rules for collecting debts will fill our jails with people who owe money. As a result, many people will not be useful to themselves or the community. Now remember, we are contextualizing more so now. So let me do some contextual thinking here out loud. There is little money right now, that matters. So this is an issue. So it's sparking part of the rebellion here, or the uprising. The harsh rules, okay, so he's feeling that things are harsh. That's an important word from his perspective, because harsh means that it's difficult for the people. So harsh rules for collecting debts will fill our jails with people who owe money. So as far as Gray is concerned, there are too many people going to jail for being in debt. And he says, as a result, many people will not be useful to themselves or the community. So he's saying, I think, that this is not very smart to put people in jail, because then they can't do any work. So no money can be provided by them if they're in jail. So the main idea, I think, of all of this is it's first of all, it's his first reason that they are rising up. So I'm going to say rules regarding paying taxes are resulting in people going to jail where they are not contributing to paying off the debt. All right, his second reason, money from taxes and fees should be set aside to pay off the foreign debt. All right, this is to me a very important statement that he makes. He's saying that money from taxes and fees should be set aside to pay off the foreign debt. So one would think that a country that's just out of an expensive revolutionary war would in fact be doing just this. It's interesting to me that they aren't, so I want to know more about this. Instead of it being used to pay off investments that are held by wealthy Americans, he's saying instead it is being used to pay off investments that are held by wealthy Americans. Well, this is a big deal. If that is the case, I would be angry too if I were one of these that rose up. Instead of improving our credit, our money is being used to help the rich get richer. Well, everyone knows how upsetting that can be. So to me, these kind of context clues about his passion about this is that he's conveying that people are angry to learn that their taxes are only feeding the rich and not reducing debt. All right, a third reason. The people who have stepped up to demand rights for themselves and others are likely to be put in jail. They are often put in jails far from home. Now the government will not allow people to petition the court to make sure their imprisonment is lawful. All of this is unlawful punishment. Okay, so I learned from this document that what's going to happen to these people who are protesting, they simply need to protest because this seems outlandish and unfair. They'll be put in jails, not only in jail, but in jails that are far away from where they live. And that seems unnecessary. But not only do they get put into jail, but they don't have any kind of right to appeal. They can't petition the court. So that alone, not being able to speak your case, is unlawful according to Gray. So protesters are jailed and then not given the right to explain to courts, or I should say explain their case. Today we call that due process. All right, so fourth, the Riot Act gives unlimited power to justices of the peace, sheriffs, deputy sheriffs, and police officers, and makes it impossible to bring them to court. Yet their actions may be motivated by revenge, hatred, and envy. So, I don't know why they didn't give us a main idea for this one. But anyway, we'll do the fourth main idea, and that is the Riot Act gives authorities power that can be abused. That can be, and according to Gray, and is abused. Let's just find out what the fifth reason is. Be assured that this unit of soldiers will get rid of our foreign and domestic debt with the most proper and speedy measures. So it's interesting to me that this was not included in this main idea statement column here, because this is really important. So and maybe they did it just because there's only one sentence there, but I think it's important to note that he's appealing appealing to his audience that the protesters, I'm calling them the protesters will make positive change. All right, now, given all of that, we need to read those main ideas and think about, okay, what can we say is the author's main argument? Rules regarding paying taxes are resulting in people going to jail where they are not contributing to pay off the debt. People are angry to learn that their taxes are only feeding the rich and not reducing debt. The protesters are jailed and not given the right to explain their cases to courts. The Riot Act gives authorities power that can be abused and is abused. And he believes that these people that are in the uprising will create positive change. So the question is, were Daniel Shays and his men rebels and freedom fighters? And I'd say his argument is Shays' followers were freedom fighters. Intending to change abuses of power. All right, so now we are ready for E, A, and D. Okay, so we can actually think further about this article in order to, or this speech, in order to better evaluate the reliability of the argument by looking at the timeline. So I've taken the timeline from the author's example and just placed it here, adding a little bit of my own information. So they had 1781, the Articles of Confederation, and then in 1783, the revolution actually ends. And then from 1783 through 1785, there's heavy taxes and protest. I think that addition to the timeline does matter because it's not like all this just happened all of a sudden. These things happened. There was the article, the revolution actually ended, there was debt that had to be paid. So I think adding that there's taxes and protest, and then this petitioning the government, there's an attempt to petition the government, the courts are closed. So people are being put into jail for these protests, and courts are closed to them. And that's what you can understand then with this final, oh my goodness, we're going to have to try and do more to be heard. So we get even further uprisings. And this to me is the more context for this speech. I can understand Gray's interests here. I understand each of those 5 interests better now. Now, what do I think is one unbelievable issue concerning his facts? What do I think is the strongest thing to say regarding his facts? I think it's strong to say that people were protesting taxes feeding the rich and not debt, and not foreign debt. That's the strongest part to me of the argument. Okay, what is not strong about this argument? What makes me not quite believe it as strongly? So the number one thing, I guess, would be, I know that this is a speech, and a speech is meant to be persuasive. So I'll say a speech is persuasive by nature, and he holds a powerful position as a committee member. So I think his speech is really biased. Now, what can I say about assessing this context? Well, to me, this timeline helps a lot. And I feel that given that the war had basically ended, just ended, and immediately the people were thrown into debt, and then learning that, then thrown into jail when they would protest how their taxes were being used when they were heavily taxed. I think that I feel that people must have been extremely angry while also feeling compassion about what they thought democracy would be. So they had fought in the revolution and they fought for democracy. And then to learn that democracy isn't quite what they knew they were fighting for, I think that they would have been highly impassioned. So, about what they thought democracy was, is what I was starting to say. Okay, now the D we can't really do until we've actually really thought about both articles. So now I'm just going to go to Adam's letter, and what I'm going to ask you to do is, even though there's examples of this, as you saw, my example don't match the examples in the book, so don't just simply write in the author's examples. I want you to go through this letter, and I want you to do your main idea statements. I want you to identify from your statements what the author's argument is in relation to the question, and I want you to do the E and the A. You don't need to do the D. For this lesson, I have done an I do, and you're going to be doing a you do. If I were doing this with a class of students, I would again do a we do here and do this together as a class. But I'd like you to do this as your Blackboard post, and once again, do all of the contextualizing you need to do, the sourcing, and then your reading, the main idea statements, the interpretation of or identifying the author's argument, one of the best facts in support of their argument, one of the weakest facts that makes you doubt the argument, and then what's the context there that you feel spurred Abigail Adams' thinking here in this letter.